Let us start. I would like to inform you that this session will be released to the public through a verbatim report and will also be broadcast on the Chamber of Deputies Web TV. I would also like to remind you that our colleagues are able to participate remotely as allowed by the Committee on the Rules of Procedure. On today's agenda, we have the hearing of a group of doctors who have worked in Gaza. They join us online. On behalf of the members of the committee, I would like to give a warm welcome to, once again, they join us online, Dr. Tanya Haj Hassan, an American pediatrician specialized in intensive care. She works with Doctors Without Borders and collaborates as a volunteer with Medical Aid for Palestinians UK. She has taken part in numerous humanitarian missions in Gaza, Iraq, Sudan, and other conflict zones. Since October 2023, she has been to Gaza twice, where she has treated children suffering from malnutrition, severe burns, and trauma in hospitals that are now collapsing. She's also a well-known figure in humanitarian advocacy. She has testified before parliaments and UN fora, and most recently, on October the 3rd, she also met with Italian Foreign Minister Antonio Tajani. I would also like to give a warm welcome to Dr. Deirdre Noonan, a Canadian orthopedic surgeon who has worked for most of the last decade in the international medical humanitarian sector. She spent almost 2 years in Gaza since 2019 and returned from Gaza, in July 2025, where she worked at Nasser Hospital. The health situation in the Gaza Strip is extremely serious. According to data reported by the World Health Organization, no hospital in Gaza is fully functional. Only 14 hospitals out of the 36 that existed in the Gaza Strip remain partially operational. In addition to that, 54% of essential medicines and 66% of disposable medical devices are reportedly running out. The most affected services include cardiac surgery, orthopedic surgery, ophthalmic surgery, chemotherapy, and blood diseases, as well as primary health care and vaccines. Nearly 42,000 people in the Gaza Strip have suffered permanent injuries as a result of the ongoing conflict. 42,000 people, a quarter of them are children. Since 2023, there have been a total of 167,376 injuries, including over 5,000 amputations. Unfortunately, some of these amputations happened with no anesthetics at all. In addition to more than 22,000 limb injuries, over 2,000 spinal cord injuries, 1,300 brain injuries, and 3,300 severe burns. Also widespread are eye and facial injuries, which often result in disability and stigmatization because they no longer have normal, so to say, facial characteristics. Maternity services in the war-torn enclave have also been severely affected. According to estimates, every week in Gaza, at least 15 women give birth outside a health facility with no assistance, and about 1 in 5 babies is born premature or underweight. Equally alarming are the figures on malnutrition. According to the latest findings of the United Nations Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, over 500,000 people in Gaza are living in a state of famine, which occurs when 3 factors are in place: extreme food deprivation, acute malnutrition, and deaths from starvation. In particular, almost 1 in 4 children suffers from severe acute malnutrition, which is the most lethal form, with both short and long-term impacts. Dear colleagues, against this backdrop, I'm very pleased to give the floor to Dr. Tanya Haj Hassan to address the committee. Please, over to you.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for taking the time to listen to our testimonies today. We feel sharing them with you is very important because we're some of the only external witnesses allowed on the ground, and because what we are seeing on the ground is so different than the narratives we hear in mainstream media, and so far from the inaction that we've witnessed at a governmental level. I have been in the humanitarian field for many years now, and nothing prepares you for what you see in Gaza, particularly when it comes to children. As a pediatrician, I shouldn't be so relevant, or as a pediatric intensive care doctor, I shouldn't be so relevant in the care of trauma, because in war zones, normally the majority of trauma victims are young men. That is not what we see in Gaza. What we see in Gaza mirrors the demographics of the population. It's the demographics, it's the exact demographics of the population that we see coming into the emergency department every day with trauma, severe trauma inflicted on their bodies. I was in Gaza the first time in the last, I've been in Gaza in the past to teach. However, since October 2023, the first time I'd gone to Gaza was March 2024 with the NGO Medical Aid for Palestinians. It's a UK-based NGO. And I think we have some photos that we wanted to share. So if whoever's showing the slides can go to the first photo. I spent most of my time while I was there. Can I just confirm that you're seeing a photo on your end, because we can't see them on our end?
No. There are no photos. Just a sec. Okay. Now, yes, we can.
Thank you very much. So what I experienced every day was waves of mass casualties coming into the emergency department with so many children that we often, sorry, go back to the previous photo, please. With so many children, please go back to the previous slide. With so many children that we often had to resuscitate them on the same bed or on the floor. These children, if alive, were maimed. In this photo, you see myself and 3 other colleagues simultaneously resuscitating 2 cousins, actually. The little boy at the back that you can barely see because he's so pale, bled to death. We weren't able to get him blood in time. And even when we tried to donate blood later, we found out that the lab had run out of the reagents needed to test donated blood for infections. The little girl next to him did survive. At least she was alive at the time I left Gaza, March of last year, but she had severe brain injury, will probably be disabled for life if she survived her ICU stay. I don't know what happened with either of their families. I know that it was a multi-generational family living together, and we did not have relatives coming to the bed for either child. This was a daily occurrence, and these are the children that even made it into the ER to start with. Every day, if you walked outside of the front of the emergency department at Al-Aqsa Hospital, can you go to the next slide, please? We saw shrouds of families, always families. You always saw the tiny little shrouds. We saw shrouds of families that never even made it into the emergency department because they were already dead. The morgue was always full, and there were these ice cream trucks parked outside the morgue to fit the bodies that were not fitting in the morgue. Can you go to the next picture, please? Multi-generational families wiped out in a second. This was so common that within days after October 7th, 2023, they coined the term wounded child, no surviving family. Please go to the next slide. Because there were so many children that had lost their entire multi-generational families. Can you please go to the next slide? This is one of those children. His name is Amir. He was about 13 years old. This is actually not a severe injury at all. It's cosmetic. It required plastic surgery intervention. And Amir, at least from a physical standpoint, will be fine. Amir's sister was the only other surviving member of his family when he came to the emergency department in that mass casualty. She was in the bed next to him, but she was burned beyond recognition to the extent that Amir kept calling her name and didn't recognize that she was the girl being resuscitated next to him. She died 2 days later under my care in the intensive care unit. Amir survived. He survived to tell me only a day or two later that he had wished he had died too, because everybody he loves is now in heaven. This is a very tragic story, but it is not an exception. These are the children I treated every single day. Can you go to the next slide, please? One before, actually. I think you skipped a slide. Or perhaps not. You can stay here. It's fine. These are the children we treated every single day. Sometimes we wouldn't even be able to identify the actual child. In this example, you can see marker on this child's abdomen. It says the word majhul, which means unknown, because we didn't even know the child's name, whether the child's family had survived. She had multiple shrapnel injuries to her bowel, to her chest wall. She had shrapnel going in one side of her brain to the other, to the extent that she couldn't move the other side of her body. She had a stroke at the age of 5 years old. We later were able to identify her and find out that both her parents were injured and all of her sisters were killed. On the same day, I can remember and tell you clearly that the girl in the bed next to her was 1 year old, had lost her mother, had multiple shrapnel injuries to her bowel and her chest as well. She'll be fine from the physical health standpoint, but she will live the rest of her life without her mother. The boy in the bed on the other side of her had multiple injuries to both his legs and will likely lose both his legs. In fact, he almost bled to death and his heart stopped twice in the operating theater. All of his siblings were killed except one 14-year-old sister, who is the only other surviving member of his family. Both his parents were critically injured. This was the daily occurrence in Gaza. Entire families eliminated, exterminated in an instant, often leaving 1 or 2 children surviving that entire multi-generational family. In fact, if you take a step back, more children were killed in Gaza in the first 4 months than all global conflicts combined in the 4 preceding years. Can you go to the next picture, please? Sometimes these children, and this question comes up a lot, who takes these children home? Who cares for them? This child stayed with me in the ICU until an extended relative could come get her, because her mother, her father, and her 5-year-old sister were all killed. She smelt of weapons. Her uncle had to dig her out of the rubble meters away from the apartment where she was sleeping, and they were bombed in their sleep. She survives, stinking of weapons that are supplied by so many of the very countries that are signed onto treaties and that are legally responsible not to send weapons, not to arm this sort of civilian violence. Can you go to the next picture, please? It isn't just children that were systematically killed. It's also healthcare workers. So many of our colleagues in Gaza have been killed, injured, many of them detained and tortured in Israeli detention. This is one of my colleagues who was a nurse in the emergency department who was detained in Israeli prisons for 2 months. He sustained severe physical, sexual, and psychological torture. When he was released, he had insomnia and dealt with what he'd experienced by working almost 24 hours a day. He was always in the emergency department working, but he was exhausted. And in this picture, He's holding a child that just died after we weren't able to resuscitate her. And he fell asleep on the bed in front of him in the emergency department, still holding the dead child. Our healthcare workers, our colleagues, are killed, maimed, illegally detained and tortured. Many of them are still in Israeli detention, sustaining severe torture. Meanwhile, they've been having to treat the types of patients that Deirdre and I cared for 2 years, consistently every single day, with minimal resources, while being serially displaced, while having to lose family members on a daily basis. Today and yesterday, I received condolence messages about some of my pediatric colleagues losing their families, both today and yesterday. Every day we wake up worried about who of our colleagues might have been killed, or whose father, mother, sister, husband, wife, children were killed overnight. It's not just healthcare workers that are systematically targeted. Can you go to the next slide, please? It's also healthcare facilities. And this last time I was in Gaza, I was there during the brief ceasefire period, and I had a chance to travel to Gaza City. I traveled to some of the hospitals I had worked at before, or I had taught at in the past. What you can see here was the beating heart of Gaza's healthcare system, the main hospital for the Strip. You see the hospital beds hanging out of the windows. There were even dialysis lines still with blood in them on the ground under the sand. The ICU department was destroyed, the neonatal intensive care department, all the departments were destroyed. I also visited the remains of the last two functioning the main two pediatric hospitals for the Gaza Strip. One of them is completely destroyed. And that hospital might be familiar to some of you because it was forcibly evacuated last year. And when it was evacuated, the pediatric intensive care doctors said that they weren't able to safely and quickly evacuate the babies on ventilators. So they were told by the Israeli military that to leave them behind and that they would arrange for their safe evacuation. When the Palestinian healthcare workers were able to return to the hospital after the Israeli military withdrew, they found the babies still connected to ventilators, but dead and decomposing in their hospital beds. I visited the remains of that hospital. I visited the remains of the adjacent Rantisi subspecialty hospital, where all cases of subspecialty pediatric disease used to be cared for. That hospital was used as a military base by the Israeli military. Essential equipment was destroyed, infrastructure was destroyed. And in fact, since I was in Gaza in March of this year, the Palestinian pediatricians were able to go back and rehabilitate some of the departments, but only in the last month they were forcibly evacuated once again, meaning that children with chronic diseases, with subspecialty needs, have nowhere to be cared for anymore. The Israeli military has prevented the entry of essential pediatric equipment as well. So now there are no more remaining pediatric or neonatal intensive care units for Gaza City and the north of Gaza, except for one non-governmental hospital that opened a small ICU after October 2023. But they don't have enough ventilators, and Israel has been systematically obstructing the entry of ventilators. In fact, today, UNICEF reported that incubators for newborn and premature babies have been prohibited from entering Gaza by Israeli authorities since March of 2024, and that they have refused them multiple missions in the last weeks to the UNICEF to travel to Gaza City to recuperate what's left of the neonatal incubators to use for the population that has been forcibly moved in the last weeks to the south of the Strip. So not only are they preventing incubators from entering, they're preventing incubators from being brought from Gaza City to where the population has been forcibly displaced to. Can you go to the next picture? So hospitals have been systematically bombed, destroyed, put out of service, and that is affecting all specialties, but I can tell you it's particularly affecting the survival of children. Some might say, well, we're told that Hamas is hiding in the hospitals, that there's military activity within the hospitals. That is the narrative that we're hearing in the media, that manufactures consent for the bombing of hospitals. I will tell you, I have never seen any military activity in any of the hospitals I've worked. Not before October 2023, not after October 2023. In fact, when I was at Nasser Hospital in March of this year, I was in the emergency department when Israeli military hit the hospital with a drone strike, and the hospital caught on fire. I was right below where that fire was in the emergency department treating patients when the hospital was hit. I'm going to hand over to Dr. Deirdre now to continue. But thank you for taking time to listen to my testimony.
Sì, grazie dottoressa Tania Haj-Hassan. E ora
Thank you, Dr. Tania Haj-Hassan. Now I will turn it over to Dr. Deirdre Noonan. Please, over to you.
Thank you very much. Can we go to the next slide? This is that same hospital facade that you saw from Tania's photos. And you can see there in the hole under the blackness, you can see the signs of multiple attacks on that hospital. March, when Tania was there, May 13th, and then again in August 25th, a double tap strike by a tank on the floor of the hospital that killed 22 people and injured more. This should be...
Just a second, sorry.
Please, Dr. Deirdre, we have some...
Possiamo controllare? Okay, Dr. Noonan, shall we start again? Because now maybe we fix it, the problem. Go ahead, please.
Can you hear me well now?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes, go ahead.
All right. So this is the front of that same hospital that you saw the photo of when it was attacked in March. And you can see the effects of another attack in May. Both of those attacks killed patients in their beds. And on the 25th of August, this hospital was hit by a double TAPS tank strike. 22 people were killed on the upper floor of the hospital and 50 more were injured. It's absolutely exceptional to think about a hospital where they being attacked 3 times by a military within a few months' time. But unfortunately, this is all too common a scenario in Gaza. And in 2024, when hospital attacks around the world were already at an unprecedented level, more than 1/3 of those attacks happened in Palestine, 1,300 attacks. Next slide, please. The severity of the wounds that I was seeing are the worst that I have seen in my career. Every day I was seeing patients that would have counted amongst the worst patients' wounds that I've ever seen in my life. And the next day, the same thing would happen again. And it's still happening now. This is right now, 2 days ago, a photo that I received from colleagues. Patients so badly wounded, you can almost not see that they're his eyes, that one side has been amputated and that the other side is severely traumatized. Next slide, please. As Tania mentioned, patients all ages, from children to adults, we're treating babies with terrible injuries, 12-year-old girls like this one, whose leg is completely destroyed. I treated her younger sister as well, and their mother told me that her only son had been killed in this airstrike. Next slide, please. We see their bodies and their wounds. So these are children like any other. A little girl that came in on her stretch for follow-up surgery, and we asked her, what did she name the little rabbit that she had at the time? And she told us that she named it Sad, after her brother that was killed in the attack that wounded her. Next slide. When I was in Gaza in July, I saw not only these horrible deep wounds, but also associated burns, because so many of our patients were coming into us after bombings on tents that caused fire of the flammable material, and sometimes burnt half the patient's body, which is a type of injury that could be a death sentence, even in somewhere like Canada or like Italy. And in Gaza, it's almost impossible to treat many of those patients. Next slide. When I left in April and when I went back in July, everybody in Gaza was struggling to find food. There was nobody who was privileged enough that they were secure in the food they had. This is a plate of rice that represents what one of the doctors would have received to eat in 24 hours. Most of the staff that I talked to had lost about 20 kilograms in the last 2 years. Next slide. A lot of the patients that I saw were injured in the course of trying to get food. This little girl is one of the first patients that I treated in July. Her leg was being shattered by a bullet from a high-velocity rifle. And when I asked where she was when this little girl was stopped, I was told she was at the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation going to get food. On the next slide, you'll see the leg of a 16-year-old. He was one of the last people that I treated in Gaza in July. And when I asked him what had happened, he told me he went to try to get flour near the border, and an Israeli tank shot at the group of people that he was walking with. We don't know what's happened to him, but I'm almost certain that they never managed to save this leg. If we can go to the final slide, please. Every single day, we were having mass casualties, people injured by bombing, people injured by heavy weaponry and arms when they went to try to get food. And so on this next slide here, you will see patients that are being cared for on the floor in a tent outside the hospital, and patients that are just simply on the ground, not even inside the tent. In this situation, with this extreme lack of materials and of space, there's no way that these patients will be able to have a good outcome from the severe injuries that are being inflicted on them. When we come to a situation like this as a doctor, you try to help, but you also know that we will come too late. Doctors cannot stop bombs. And the horror of treating wounded patients while hearing the sound of airstrikes and explosions and knowing other people are being injured as you treat the last wave of injured people is an absolutely hellish experience. So, as Tanya mentioned, we see a massive disconnect between what we know is happening in Gaza and how we see the world responding to it. So we implore you to look through our eyes to see just a small snapshot of what we have seen and to use your power to take action and to affect more change than what either of us can do trying to treat patients with our own two hands.
And I just wanted to add at the end, and Dr. Deirdre and I were talking about this earlier, for every day that we hear more condemnation, recognition of what's happening, talk of plans in the making or potential action to be taken in the future, but no actual action taken. That's tens, sometimes over 100 more of these casualties and deaths, and these severe life-disabling injuries. The blood of all of these children, of these families, it's on our hands every day that we delay actual action. Not only is it complicity when we talk about legal obligations both to individuals and states in the face of this sort of thing, but also it's morally so far from what we should be as human beings and what we have learned not to do from our past. And so we implore you, knowing, as Dr. Deirdre said, doctors cannot stop genocide. We implore you to stop, to move from mere condemnation to action that actually stops these crimes from being committed. Not only to save the people that would be killed in this period, maimed and killed in this period, but also because this precedent of impunity that's been set is going to spread everywhere. The fabric of international law, the fabric of international human rights is also what's at stake here. Never before have we watched as hospitals systematically across an entire strip, virtually every single hospital has either been physically completely destroyed or put out of service for 2 years. And we've seen so little global response. Never before have we seen this number of pediatric amputees or children who've lost their entire families, or even children who've been killed. This is unprecedented in our lifetime, and we're imploring you to act, not just condemn.
Thank you very much indeed. I would like to thank both doctors for this description of the daily job. We are witnessing the massacre of whole families, a huge number of people that are left with no parents, young people that are left orphans. You talked about people that cannot be treated due to the lack of medicines. You talked about this never-ending massacre. Now, I would like to ask my colleagues if they have specific questions. I think that what we heard has shaken us very much indeed. So I would like to ask my colleagues if they have any question to Dr. Tanya Haj Hassan and Dr. Deirdre Noonan. Honorable Calovini, please, over to you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mrs. Chairwoman. I'm very sorry for being late, so I apologize. Perhaps the questions I'm going to ask have already been dealt with. My question has to do with the conditions of a hospital, especially when it comes to the treatment of children. Last week I went to my city where I welcomed a Palestinian family. I talked to a doctor. He suffered a very serious neurological damage. He was found in very good physical conditions as far as nutrition is concerned, but of course not as far as the neurological situation is concerned. So my question is, in this moment, are there some kind of injuries that can be better addressed than others? Are some specializations that hospitals can no longer cope with? The second question, without going into, I would like to, something is being done. I'm talking about the hospitals that are welcoming these children. Do they have to do more over neurological diseases or injuries rather than other issues? I'm sorry, I'm not a doctor, but I hope my question has been understood. Thank you. Now over to our colleague Sara Ferrari. Thank you very much indeed for your testimony. I would like to delve into healthcare operators and professionals that were arrested, held captive, and tortured before being released. It's understood that law and rights are disregarded now. We have seen hospitals being destroyed, which is, by the way, forbidden and prohibited by humanitarian law. I would like to understand what healthcare professionals are accused of. And then, are they released? What kind of trial or process do they go through? That's the focus of my question. Thank you. Thank you. Now over to our colleague Veruto. Please, over to you. Thank you. I would like to thank both doctors not just for their testimony, but especially for what they've been doing on the ground. I was particularly shocked by not just by the images, but also by one thing I heard. You said we saw injuries that we'd never seen before in our lifetime. Well, of course, I believe that unfortunately you are used to seeing all kinds of devastation that can be brought about by a situation like this. However, I was very much touched by this sentence. Of course, you are doctors, and you can understand or imagine that these injuries are due, these unprecedented injuries. My question is, are these unprecedented injuries due to unprecedented military operations? Thank you. Are there any other questions? Thank you, Mrs. Chairwoman. First of all, I would like to thank both doctors for giving us their overview and for sharing these horrible pictures with us. I would also like to take the opportunity to try and understand better the lack of ventilators and incubators. Yeah, we're talking about incubators, of course, so ventilators and incubators. Anyway, these pediatric devices, do you know whether in other occasions these kind of devices have been prohibited from entering? Has this happened before? What is the formal justification for this prohibition? Now, I would like to thank Honorable Honori. Now over to our colleague Bakali. Thank you, Mrs. Chairwoman. I would like to join my colleagues in thanking the our two guests. Over the last few days, we've seen Italian health professionals mobilizing all across the country. And I think this is something you should be aware of. Your colleagues here in Italy are shedding light on what you've been doing on the ground in the Gaza Strip and on the terrible toll you've been bearing. My question, but before that, you have shown all the emergency operations you've undertaken under the bombs, of course, to try to treat all these injuries, in particular from a pediatric point of view. Can you provide us with some information with the rights to treatment that I believe the children in Gaza no longer have? I'm talking about rights such as access to vaccinations. For example, when we visited the Rafah border crossing, we heard people talking about epidemics and the lack of access to healthcare services as far as children is concerned, in addition to malnutrition, of course. Over this issue, do you have further data and further information you could share with us? Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Bakali. If there are no further questions, I personally have a few questions. First of all, based on what you have seen, based on the kinds of injuries you have treated, are these injuries caused by firearms? Is there a will to target children, to kill children? Because according to statistics, a huge number of children have been killed. So my question is, based on these injuries, are children being targeted? I would also like to understand whether childcare units, health facilities, other health facilities for orphans in Gaza, because we understood that entire families are wiped out, and too often, on too many occasions, no one can actually retrieve children when they are released from hospitals. In this case, where do they go? Are there orphanages, for instance? Some of my colleagues and I went to the border with the Gaza Strip to Rafah. We have seen this equipment stored in the Red Crescent's warehouses. We saw incubators for children. We have seen medical equipment blocked. We saw wheelchairs. We saw ambulances. We saw energy material that are blocked from entering. We also know that the Israeli army stops food from entering. We know that because in Italy, first necessities are being gathered. The Israeli authorities have said that these goods cannot be let in if they contain jam, sugar and biscuits, because they are too nutritious. And we know very well that Gaza is suffering from a famine, and we know that this famine leads to or result in death for hundreds and thousands of people, especially children. So my message is, this material is there. However, it's not let in. The international community provides this material, but the Israeli authorities prevent it from going through. So that's my question. If this equipment was available, would it have a positive impact on patients? Would it make the difference whether they had more incubators, more ventilators, or is it already too late? So, have we already lost an entire generation of Palestinian children? Thank you.
So Dr. Deirdre and I have divided the questions amongst us. I'll start answering a few of the questions. So I think the first question was on medical evacuations and whether a lot of these children are able to be treated inside Gaza or need medical evacuation. I think you mentioned visiting a child with severe neurological injury. Evacuations are very necessary because so many of the subspecialties and the skills that are needed to care for complex injuries have been killed, detained, no longer available. Same thing applies to the institutions where they would have operated. In fact, there are no more board-certified nephrologists in Gaza. There are no more board-certified emergency medicine doctors in Gaza. The complex orthoplastic surgeons, same applies there. Medical evacuations are very important, and actually we're very grateful to Italy for leading the way on medical evacuations. And I want to acknowledge that because I think it sets an example for what many countries should be doing, even though we can always do more given the magnitude of patients in need of medical evacuations. However, even though it's so important to see a burn when you see it, as one of my colleagues said last week when we were in Italy, it's like we're treating the burns while simultaneously throwing petrol on the fire that's burning people at a rate that the evacuations will never keep up with. So the first step is to stop the violence, even while simultaneously we should be thinking about how to treat the people who are already injured. But every single day that I spent until midnight last night working on the evacuation of a child with a perforated esophagus, the feeding tube in the human body, trying to evacuate him because he will die of an infection if we cannot get proper treatment for him. And in the hours that I spent taking care of that child, I'm sure many other children were injured. So we really need to think about how we stop the violence to start with, even though the evacuations are very important. There are a lot of children, in response to the question about neurological injuries, there are so many children in Gaza with severe traumatic brain injury. These sorts of injuries need not only very intensive care in the first few days and weeks to ensure the child survives and survives with the best neurological outcome, but then they then need months of intensive physical and occupational rehabilitation. This is not possible in Gaza right now. I tried to provide it for a few of the patients. It's just not possible. It's not possible. The healthcare system is at its knees. Most of the facilities that would have cared for these children have been destroyed. There are so few ICUs left that even just a couple of days ago, one of my colleagues was telling me, I don't have ventilators, I don't have inotropes, I don't have sedatives to care for the number of children that are moving from Gaza City to Deir el-Balah and Khan Yunis, so to south of essentially moving south because they're being forcibly displaced. So the demand for services it has increased or increases every single day, but the supply or the actual facilities where the cases would have been cared for are simultaneously being destroyed and forcibly evacuated. I think the next question was about healthcare workers and why they are being detained or attacked. I asked my colleagues the same question. I got different answers. One answer is we're attacked because we're healthcare workers, because of our role in saving lives. In fact, some of my colleagues said they change out of their scrubs when they leave the hospital because they're scared that wearing scrubs or medical uniform is like wearing a target on your back. Others who were detained and subsequently released were accused of treating Hamas resistant fighters who were injured, or accused of treating Israeli hostages in the hospital. And I should just be clear, and I don't know who they treated in the hospital. In fact, I never treated anybody in the hospital, even though I occasionally treated young men in the emergency department. I never treated anyone in the hospital that I would be able to distinguish whether they were a fighter or not. And frankly, it's irrelevant. As healthcare workers, we treat anybody who comes through the door. That is what we do, and that is our legal obligation. But they are telling us that they're targeted because of their life-saving work, and because sometimes they are accused of these things during the sort of interrogation and torture sessions that they had in detention. And in fact, one of my colleagues told me that they kept insisting that he was part of Hamas, and he kept saying he wasn't, and they threatened to bomb his family, and said that they knew where his family was in Gaza and that they were going to rape the female members and kill the rest if he didn't confess that he was Hamas. He was ultimately released, obviously, because he had committed no crime. Some of our colleagues were not as fortunate and actually died in detention, being subjected to severe torture. These are physician colleagues of ours. So far, four of our healthcare worker colleagues have died in Israeli detention that we know of. You asked about incubators and other equipment not being let into Gaza. Yes, all of these things are prohibited. Do I have other examples of occasions where they haven't been let into countries? Or I haven't had that experience personally. I also know that so many of the things, even us as emergency medical teams, when we try to go to Gaza, we're prohibited from bringing in many things, including medical equipment and medications. And some of the personal medications of healthcare workers are confiscated and thrown in the garbage at the border as we're trying by Israeli authorities as we're trying to go into Gaza. One of my colleagues also, who went in more recently, told me that the baby formula was taken out of the healthcare workers' bags and disposed of in the bins. And these are healthcare workers who are already approved by Israeli authorities to enter the Gaza Strip. The excuse given when we ask about why these things can't be brought in, sometimes we hear the excuse of dual use. I don't know what other use baby formula could have. I don't know what other use seeds for growing things can have. I don't know what other use incubators to keep babies warm could have, other than sustaining human life. You asked about the question about rights for children, and well, I think I would ask that question back and say, what do you think the needs are for children? What are, what rights should a child have access to? Shelter, protection, protection of their families, education, healthcare. All of those things have been under attack. The majority of Gaza's schools have been destroyed. Gaza's universities have been destroyed. The medical schools have been destroyed. Facilities to care for the deaf and the blind and other facilities needed to safeguard children have been destroyed. Children have been out of school now for 2 years. Their shelters have been destroyed. They're living in tents that are still bombed, even when these tents are in the safe zones. So I almost find it laughable. If it weren't so tragic, I probably would laugh, to read through the rights of a child under the UN charters and then sort of compare to how we're reacting to what we call unchilding of children in Gaza.
Excuse me, I'm afraid we have to make it shorter because we have to go to vote. So if you can please answer in 5 minutes, I would really appreciate.
I want to give Dr. Deirdre a chance, so I'll stop there and hand over to Dr. Deirdre if you want to answer any of the remaining questions that we have time for.
So I'm still in Italy right now as we speak, and so I have had the privilege of seeing some of the ongoing demonstrations of solidarity from the healthcare workers here, as well as from regular citizens, and it's been very powerful and very moving seeing a country come together like this. Just a few additional points other than what Dr. Chania had said. If we think these children with neurological injuries, these are some of the most complex, but there is essentially no injury that can currently be well managed in Gaza. From the smallest wound, this is happening in people that have not had enough to eat, so their immune systems don't work and they can't heal properly. These people are living in tents where they struggle to have basic hygiene. And the healthcare institutions that are trying to treat them are so overloaded and overwhelmed and have so little supply that there is no specialty in Gaza in terms of medical care that is providing ideal treatment or even appropriate treatment. And so that's why I think it's so important that we focus. It's not about the few patients that we can get out. This is a powerful gesture of humanity. It's an important symbolic movement widely, and it's life-changing for those individual families. But we have to think about this within the perspective of the fact that there are hundreds of thousands of people with injuries that are not going to be able to benefit from evacuation. We talked about the severity of these injuries, the power of the weaponry that results in this kind of injury. And the fact that this is much worse in terms of quantity and concentration than what I've seen in terms of severity of injuries in other places where I've worked. And as an orthopedic surgeon, I primarily see people with injuries to the extremities. But I have also seen in the operating room and in the emergency room, children with gunshot wounds to the center of the forehead, children with gunshot wounds to the center of the chest. And you can look to the testimonies of multiple other healthcare workers who have come out of Gaza, who have seen children shot not once, but twice in the head. And ask yourself, how can this be consistent with anything other than either willful targeting or such incredible lack of respect for civilian lives that we see these types of injuries? The blockade of food and medicine, I think, was very powerfully described. And this is affecting all people, but we cannot think that it's too late. It is certainly too late for the people that have died. It is too late for the people who have already been injured to have an ideal outcome. But for every Palestinian that is left alive in Gaza right now, those are lives that are worthy of saving. And those are people who are worthy of having the best care completely provided for them from this stage forth. And so opening the borders and delivering meaningful aid and stopping the violence, it's not too late for any of that. And it is absolutely crucial that now is the best time for this, to move quickly, to move powerfully, and to stop attacks on Gaza, to stop the siege, and to stop the global complicity in a genocide.
Grazie, grazie, dottoressa.
Thank you, Dr. Deidre Noonan. Thank you, Dr. Tanya Haj Hassan, for your accounts. You have given us grim information that depicted our situation. We must understand whether we will be able to come up with a parliamentary act to follow up on what you have told us, to follow up on your call to action so that we can put an end to this slaughter that is actually affecting the young and the children. Thank you. And I declare this hearing closed.